So last time we introduced the concept of branched code, where based on a condition, you have a chunk of code that might execute or it might not. And the structure we introduced for that was what we're calling the if statement or the if block. Using the same example from before, we'll say age is 15, and we'll say if age is greater than or equal to 16, we will print out you can drive. Okay, and we'll run that code, and we'll see here that nothing is going to happen as a result. Okay, and we got nothing printed out after our code ran because we did not meet the condition. So we could put another line to print out here just so that we're sure something is running. But maybe for some reason we need some text if the condition is not met. So one way to do that could be with another if block. We could say if age is less than 16, then we will have a different output statement that says you can not drive. And if you remember, we talked about this before, that greater than or equal to is the opposite of less than. And if we scroll up in the notes here, we'll see that those hold true here as well. Those are in our opposites. But this is, kind of cumbersome, and it means that if you want your code to do something like this, if you have to do it this way, then you're going to have these two if blocks for every single condition. Fortunately, we have a solution for that. And in addition to the if statement, or the if blocks, we have the else. And the else looks very similar to the if, but you'll notice it does not have a condition. Okay, so I'm going to extend the notes we have up here, and we're going to refer to this as the if else statement, or the if else block. So we have if code else. Okay, we'll throw in some comments, and then we'll say else code. So the difference here is that the if code only runs when the condition is true, and the else code only runs when the condition is false. So instead of having to write two separate ifs for a what we'll call a complementary condition, whether the age is greater than or equal to 16 or the age is less than 16, two conditions that complement each other, you can use one condition with two blocks. And so we've mentioned before how code executes in order, right? This print line is on line 81. This print line is line 83. So it looks like this line comes first. But that's only if you're considering the order of execution. You also have to consider branching. An if in your code says, hey, there's a branch here. When the condition is met, if it is true, then we take the if code. If the condition is not true, we skip the if code and look for an else. So if I run the code this time, notice the age is 15. If I run the code this time, I do get my you cannot drive. And so if I were to add just a couple more lines of prints in here, just to get us some experience with it, we'll say that this is before the block, and then we'll have another line that is after the block. So I'll run this, run Java. Before the block, you cannot drive. After the block, then I'll bump the age up to some number above 16, run the code again, before, block, after. So notice that everything that happens inside of this chunk of code is isolated from the lines before and the lines after. So we hit line 78, we run it. We hit line 80, we run it. We hit line 82, and we check the condition. If the condition is true, then we run line 83. But if the condition was false, we're going to run line 85. And so the else doesn't get a condition, because the else says, whatever the if condition was, if you did not meet the condition, do this instead. And this kind of goes back to how with booleans there are only two possible choices. There's a true and there's a false. So because there's only two possible outcomes here, either true or false, if the condition is not true, by definition, it must be false. And so again, just like with the if, you can put a whole bunch of these in here. In fact, you can still nest these. So I can say if age is greater than 19, we can throw in, like last time where we said, you are, no longer a teenager. And we can put an else in here where we can say about the same thing. We can just say you are still a teenager. And we can put a condition here. We can say if my age is exactly 15, then we can say, okay, and we'll talk about what these are in a sec. So we'll say maybe wait a year, else, and then we can say something like you have a ways to go. So looking at these guys, this is a much bigger block now. It got more complex by adding what we call nested conditionals. There's one inside of another. So we can say, okay, your age is greater than or equal to 16. If you are over 16, and then if you are over 19, you're not a teenager. If you are over 16 and you are not over 19, you're still a teenager. If you are not 16 or older, and your age is exactly 15, you can drive next year maybe. Or if you are not 16, and then you are not exactly 15, you still have at least a couple years, at least a year. So if I were to do an age like 14, I run the code, run Java. Before, you cannot drive, so I did not meet the first condition. You have a ways to go. I did not meet this inner condition. So I'll bump it up to 15 so we can see that. Before, and then you cannot drive. We didn't meet the condition. Maybe wait a year. I did meet this inner condition. And then we'll go, we'll say 19, and we'll do a breakpoint this time. We'll just trace through it. Oops, not if I hit the run button. If I want to do that, I have to hit the debug button. Okay, so I get the age, step over, it'll print the line. There's the line. Checks the condition, I am greater than or equal to 16, so I'll print this line. Checks my condition, I am not greater than 19, so I go inside the else. And notice, because the age is 19 and 19 is not greater than 19, we failed the condition, so we go to the else. And so the else is a nice way, whereas before, if we just use a regular if statement, right, if the condition is not met, then we are just skipping that whole section of code. Now, if the condition is not met, we can say, okay, you didn't meet the condition, but we want you to do this other behavior anyway. Whereas before, we wouldn't have had any of this else, and we wouldn't have had any of this else. So we really could have only had a couple of choices. So having the if-else in addition to the if gives you more options. It's not going to be true that now that you know the if-else, you're always going to use the if-else. Sometimes you want to use just the if. A common example is if you're trying to do a quick check and say, hey, do I need to finish early? You can use the if to exit before you normally would. But these are just two ways to use conditionals. And there's a couple more ways. There's a third way that's going to be pretty useful that we're going to look at more in the next video. But now you have a way to branch if the condition is successful, and you also have a way to branch even if the condition is not successful.